Thanks for coming, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the director of adult programs here. This is Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. Thanks if you're joining us online as well, or this way. If you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit literary center. We do readings, workshops, literary programming for people of all ages and backgrounds. So you can find more information at our website, wab.org.
And a bookstore.
Yes, and our bookstore, Ampersand Books, where you can buy The Observant downstairs or online. I'll put the link in the chat. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are hosting this event from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the Keeper of the Western Gate. We are so happy to have Ravi Mangla with us and Will Cleveland. First, Ravi will read, then he'll be in conversation with Will. Will Cleveland is the Deputy Chief of Research in the Policy and Oversight Division for the Rochester Police Accountability Board.
Lots of words.
He previously spent 14 years working for the Democrat and Chronicle, where he wrote about public safety and policing the Rochester community. He chronicles the evolving upstate New York beer scene through a weekly newsletter called the Cleveland Post. Ravi Mangla's The Observant is a sharp-eyed literary thriller about the freedom of expression under tyrannical regimes, authority and its adherents, and the demands of survival. Ravi Mangla is the author of the novels The Observant and Understudies. His writing has appeared in the Kenyon Review, Cincinnati Review, American Short Fiction, Los Angeles Review of Books, Jacobin, and the Paris Review Daily. He lives in Rochester and works in political organizing. Ravi and Will, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Invite.
Turn it over to you guys.
Sure. So I guess I'm starting reading.
Yep. How about it?
So I'm just going to read a couple of short excerpts from the book, and for some context, it's written in a almost vignette or collage type of style. So jumping from scene to scene. So I think if you hear things jumping around, that's just how it's organized. But yeah, I guess we'll talk more about the book afterwards. But just very briefly, it concerns a documentary filmmaker who's taken captive in a composite authoritarian country and then forced to make films, propaganda cinema, for the dictator, who is one of the central characters in the book. While it's thrilling, there's also humor and a number of other elements in here. So I'm gonna read a couple of excerpts, then I might close with like a self-contained short story, because I think it's nice to have something that actually has a start and finish as opposed to just, excerpts. The guard watched intently as I stripped down and changed into navy blue jumpsuit. The color seemed counterintuitive, too ordinary for the context. Prisoners back home were outfitted in orange so they could be identified at a distance, shelled by snipers if the carnage could be justified, which it seemed it always could be. I was led silently to my cell down a narrow corridor. The guard's boots whined against the floor, which were slick with mop water. We passed leaden doors, one row after another. None of the doors had windows or numbers. The guard led me up a metal staircase, prodded me with the butt of his wooden baton when my pace slowed. They had taken away my kara, the silver bracelet native to 6, that had been given to me by my late father. We paused in front of a gray door unmarked, identical to the others. He urged me inside and then closed the door. I began to yelled until my body had been hollowed and temples throbbed, an intensity of expression untapped since childhood. Weakened, I sat down on the mattress, thin and abraded, and surveyed my accommodations, which were no larger than a walk-in closet. The toilet was deprived of both a seat and cover. The sink basin was rusted. There was no desk or writing surface of any kind. The corner window, covered with iron slats, projected a barcode of light. The room had a souring smell like that of milk left out overnight. A wiry spider, for whom the cell might be considered spacious, skittered across the concrete floor before holing up inside the toe of my slipper. Physical isolation proved less of a menace than the utter absence of sound. To be separated from the rest of civilization without the instruments of communication we took for granted seemed an insufferable punishment. Sometimes I coughed just to hear the sound reverberate, die away. I had, in the months prior, grown accustomed to falling asleep to mundane sounds playing on my phone, rain patter, distant thunder, crackling fires, and the like. The sound seemed to settle me after long and confounding days catching money from mercurial investors. As I fell asleep, I tried to remember popular songs from my youth, but either I couldn't remember the lyrics or they played out of key. Meals in the prison were not designed to resolve hunger. Thin stews, vegetable purees, stale breads. They were served through a mail-sized slot in the door 3 times per day. The sound of the metal door sliding open was similar to that of a knife being sharpened, and yet I waited eagerly for this threatening sound, for the grate to open and the outside world to make its meager offering. A pair of studio lights directed their twin ire at my sedentary form. Each light was canted at a 45-degree angle, and both seemed vulnerable to topple at any moment. My inquisitor was seated between the lights against the far wall. The tableau reminded me of school photos, only without the discharge of a flash or the companionable appeal for a half smile. I could make out only the broad strokes of his appearance, close cropped hair, and the hint of a mustache. A manila folder was open in his lap. "Dear Mr. Rai, gives me no pleasure to have to interview you today," he started, as if delegating a letter to an assistant. "I hope we can sort out this misunderstanding and send you on your way home." He turned over the page, browsed its backside, and then restored it to its original order. "We only wish to know where you were between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Wednesday the 5th. I blinked at the ceiling. The lights left blood orange impressions on the underside of my eyelids. "By all means, take your time." His blind stabs at empathy felt like an affront to my faculties, a tactic designed for a less perceptive person. He clicked and unclicked his pen against his left knee. The lights persuaded several beads of sweat to form along my upper lip. They made a droning noise I hadn't heard at first, an insect-like buzzing that scuttled its way into my ear canal and settled there. After an extended silence, the inquisitor spoke up. "Perhaps you are still exhausted from the ordeal. This is understandable. Let's plan to speak again soon." He closed the folder in his lap without ceremony. "How are your accommodations?" he added. "The nights get cold," I said. He stood. Initially, I thought he would stalk toward me, but he unlocked the latch above the door handle and whispered to the guard outside. The guard nodded and withdrew himself. A moment later, he returned with a folded stack of blankets. The thin mattress doubled over readily, without resistance. I climbed onto the cushion and drew myself eye level with the window. The pinstriped opening afforded a compromised view of the prison's boundaries. The tall limestone wall, crowned with loose coils of wire, low hills of parched grass peered out from over the barricades, beyond which stood a city I couldn't see, and farther still, a home I couldn't reach. A white lookout tower no larger than my cell pinnacled the high wall. Through the window, I could see the guard, rifle in hand, staring languidly over the grounds. Were he to look toward the prison quarters, could he distinguish me through the small window? Would he raise his radio to his mouth and signal the guards to storm in and restrain me, lock me in an even smaller room bereft of light? I mourned the authority exerted by my camera. It was a power I sensed the first time I stepped into a college film class. For a shy child raised by bitterly disappointed people, the camera afforded a way to mediate the world. It gave me purpose when I had none. The camera was my armor. Behind the lens, I was immune to the ritual indignities of daily life. Now the dynamic had shifted. I was a subject, surveyed by a revolving door of expressionless men in military costumes. My narrative was no longer my own. Whatever was to happen to me was out of my control. I was a goldfish in a glass bowl looking out on an indifferent world. And then I'm jumping ahead, and I often like to read a scene related to the Falcon because everybody asks, why is there a Falcon on the cover? So this is from a later scene in the book that revolves around the sport of falcon racing, which is in fact a very real sport and very popular among people with a certain amount of wealth. At the camp, young men in colored headscarves and white robes erected tents and canopies. The evening was dry and cool with a restless breeze that shaped furrows into the waves of sand. The sun, ruby red, rested imperiously on the horizon. I walked past a one-armed man with a falcon perched on his surviving forearm, the bird strapped in a bejeweled mask. Behind him was an unsteady tower of caged birds, one stacked on top of the other. The birds, though varying in size, resembled one another in color, gray flecked wings and bright yellow talons. They remained still and silent in their tailored masks, blind to the events happening around them. At the periphery of the camp, a dozen black Land Rovers were parked at a slight cant. Each was immaculate as the next. Breaking with tradition, a white Rolls Royce pulled up alongside the matching vehicles. An elaborate hood ornament punctuated its presence. On closer inspection, I recognized it to be a live bird. Mohadesi sat on a tufted pillow in a tangerine-colored robe. His tent rivaled the size of my Brooklyn apartment. Did they show you to your sleeping quarters? He said. They did. Earlier in the afternoon, one of the attendants escorted me to a subdivided tent, generously proportioned where my bags lay in wait. What's the reason for this trip? I asked. Does there have to be a reason for everything? Mohadesi said. The weather was ideal for racing, and there was nothing on my schedule that couldn't be moved to a later date. Be at ease, soldier, he said, making a calming motion with his hand. This is meant to be a time of leisure. Leisure. It was a curious choice of word to produce in front of someone being held against their will. A boy chopped firewood lodged in a rubber tire. The desert scene felt out of a dream. He moved purposefully around the tire, bringing his axe down on the log until it had broken into even quadrants. I stood closer to watch him. He took no notice of me. I wondered how a boy so young could muster the strength to split wood. In time, he introduced himself as Bashir, and I asked him questions out of curiosity. He said he lived in a village at the edge of the desert. I guide people, I carry trunks, I cook, he said, whatever they pay me to do. What about school? I asked. The boy laughed and brought down the axe on a new log. He struck me as a child wiser in the ways of the world, its requirements for survival, than most adult men. I asked him if I could try my hand at chopping. He shrugged and handed me the blade. I examined it briefly, felt its weight in my palm. Then I drew it above my head and brought it down with full force. The heel of the axe embedded itself in the surface of the log. I tried to remove it, but it wouldn't budge. The boy stepped around me, put his sandaled foot on the tire, and withdrew the axe without struggle or ceremony. Dinner was cooked with great attention over an open flame. Squab pierced with long skewers were rotated at precise intervals. The men had broken off into smaller groups for socializing and games of cards. Flasks were exchanged, filled with foreign liquors strictly verboten by law. Demir stood at the edge of the flames, transfixed as I was, his hands clasped behind his back. I noticed you didn't pray with the others, I said. I was raised in a secular household, he said. Religion has never held sway over me. There are times when I wish I still had faith. It's possible I never had it, and that I just took comforts in the rituals of the faithful, though perhaps that's the same thing. One can have faith in things other than God, he said. Smoke rose from the birds, their crisping skin. Fortunately, President Mohadesi appreciates many forms that faith takes. And what do you have faith in? He turned solemnly to me. The flames in his glasses were replaced with the cold desert landscape. Money, Mr. Rai. These were only test runs, trials designed to show off the Falcons to prospective buyers. The morning was warm and promised warmer. Most of us, 30 or 40 people, took refuge under the shade of the canopy. The breeders exhibited the birds, their outspread wings, and finely manicured beaks and talons before slipping off their masks with a practiced delicacy and lifting them one by one into ecstatic flight. The birds broke free of their masters and beat their wings with great rapacity, aiming to make an impression. Motion sensors marked the start and finish of the course, and flight times were displayed on an electric board held up by a young turbaned man. I struggled to keep the falcons in the camera frame. I didn't want to resort to zooming out, relegating them to mere specks on the desert horizon. Onlookers referred to sheets that assigned a number to each falcon. They made notes in journals or on their phones, conferred in hushed whispers with one another. In the distance, several hundred meters out, a man swung a rope baited with carrion. As the falcon neared, the offering was whipped away. The falcon lifted and turned, its wings at full and glorious stretch. For their exploits, the birds were treated to leftover pigeon from the night before and sprayed down with cool water. I was struck by the novelty of the contest, which Mohadesi had ironically dubbed, quote, the sport of princes. Victory was a product neither of rarefied talent nor the acquisition of a particular skill. It was achieved by pure submission, dominion over a wild creature whose nature was to hunt and kill. Now I'm going to switch over to a story. That was an excerpt about falcon racing, which is very, very interesting if you look into it. And there is a documentary, which I cannot recall the name of, but gets into some of the sport and how it has become a big thing and a kind of status symbol among people of wealth. So I think it often helps to read something that is like lighter or more comic, as well as self-enclosed. And this is a short story that was in the Syracuse University Journal, Salt Hill, like a year or so ago. And for folks that don't know, my day job is a lot in political communications and just the world of politics generally. And I think that for a long time, that really did not intersect so much with my writing work, that they felt very different. And then slowly over time, they began to blur to where The Observant is very, very political, and deals a lot with the backdrop of it is, you could say, social uprising. And then I began writing more stories that at least touch on political or community organizing work that I've been involved with for the last, 6-7 years or so. So this is a story called Canvasser, and it's about the great art of knocking on doors, if anybody has done it. Knocking on doors seemed as good a job as any. The contract was for only 3 months and would give me a chance to stretch my legs. I was twice the age as the other recruits, knee-deep in my 30s and familiar with life's disappointments. We were given a script to read and a list of addresses printed in too small type. The field director was an acne-scarred beanstalk named Mosier, who spent a semester abroad in Japan and now answered the phone with Moshi Moshi. He lined up the new hires and strode back and forth with his hands clenched behind his back. From now on, you eat, sleep, and breathe doors. Screen doors, side doors, wooden doors, sliding doors. He continued listing variations of doors. Got a girlfriend, a boyfriend, drop them, you're dating doors now. They sent me to the city's outer dregs to sermonize on the hidden harms of carbon. I was hopped up on cheap coffee and purpose. But door after door, the result was the same. People were not home or pretended to be not home or opened the door to tell me they were not home. A septuagenarian woman with a tangled nest of henna-dyed hair answered, stunned me by not flinging the door in my face. I fumbled for the script. A nice shelf the size of canvas slides into the sea. The skies are gray with soot and smell of wet dog. A young boy just discovering his body is sucked into the maw of a raging hurricane. Honeybees are now automated and all the apiary jobs have been shipped to Honduras. What do these things have in common? You can stop them with your one-time non-sequential cash donation. This sounds very important, the woman said, a look of sincere concern, but I stopped keeping money in my house after those twin brothers escaped from the local prison. There was nothing in my training manual about twin brothers. Why don't you wait here while I visit the bank, she said, slipping on her slip-on shoes. The woman climbed into her guzzler of a truck and motored off. I sat down on the porch and checked my messages. I had no messages. The afternoon heat pounded down like a battering ram. I leaned against the porch pillar and closed my eyes. When I woke, darkness had staked its claim to the evening. The truck was still missing. I started walking back to the office. Mosier was leaning over a pinball machine, goading the flippers to flip harder. I didn't remember this machine from the morning orientation. What was your haul? He asked, toweling off. I presented a pocket full of change, salvaged from the sidewalks. Mosier looked at me with predicted disappointment. Maybe doors aren't for you. There were complications, I said. Don't piss in my mouth and tell me it's raining, he said. There's one thing I can't stand, it's piss takers. Mosier paid me for the day and sent me packing. I had to catch 2 buses to get home, transferring at the newfangled transit hub. Walking up the steps to the apartment, I saw Cassandra through the kitchen window, buds implanted in either ear, nodding along to the latest synth pop revival. I couldn't find my apartment keys. I feared they'd slinked out of my pocket on the second bus leg. I knocked on the door. She couldn't hear me. I knocked again, harder. Still no answer. I kept knocking, a steady thrum, until the pain in my knuckles was radiant and bright. That's all I got reading wise, but looking forward to talking with Will.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the invite, Writers and Books. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed your book, Ravi. I will admit that I ordered it one night when you made like a pitch on Twitter, and I was not sober, but I was happy because you could wake up and you've ordered something that you don't want, and then but I woke up and I'm like, oh, I ordered a book. That's cool.
That's my ideal audience.
Yeah. So it worked out really well because then it got delivered a few weeks later, and I was very thankful and excited that I got to support local and all that stuff. So.
And you are the king of supporting local.
I try. Yeah, I mean, I try. It's important. It's we're all we got. But anyways, so yeah, I jotted down some questions. In my second reading of the book, I will say that I read the book for the second time while my son was watching Bluey. That was my social media post was for real. We're obsessed with that.
I only recently learned about it, but
it's Australian and it's really endearing and really funny. And it's like a kid's show that doesn't suck. So
that's important,
which is cool. All right. So I've read in previous interviews where you've said that this book took you a number of years to write. So first of all, can you tell us about how long did this book take you to write, and then also like what was the process like? Because I assume that with it taking a few years, I'm assuming there were like starts and stops and fits and start or whatever. Like how did you crystallize that vision if you were working on it over such a long time? And it's not like this is a big Moby Dick Goliath of a book. It's something that's it's something you can devour in a few hours.
Yeah, totally. When you tell people like you took years, they expect something that's like
right.
huge, and then it's very small. But it's a good question. My first book, which came out about 2013 from the Outpost 19, and also a very short novel, but that took about 5-6 months to write it. It was quite a short process. I had a lot more time. I was working part-time and was able to dedicate so much time to that project. I think just on a pure pragmatic level or like practical level, just not having time anymore, the same amount of free time to be able to dedicate to writing. I don't work teaching creative writing like a lot of other writers. And because of my political work, it ends up being, a lot of 50, 60-hour weeks. So I tend to use my vacation time and kind of chip away at it, which I can say is a very different experience of writing something in continuity compared to writing it in short bursts over a long stretch of time. It becomes difficult to kind of get back into that mindset and find that rhythm again. And for me, a lot of writing is just like the sound of the sentences and the sound of the words. And I write sentences there's a way that I like to write them. Yeah, I would almost describe them as kind of angular, and
it kind of reminds me, this is going to sound like a really weird juxtaposition, but almost like math rock, where it's kind of like there's an angularity to it, but there's also like a It's like staccato. It's got like a,
Yeah.
it definitely has a rhythm to it. It's almost journalistic the way you write, because you're very, short to the point. There's not a lot of like flowery nonsense. But you still do a very good job of like describing things and like transporting people to different scenes. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I picked up in your writing.
Well, first of all, math rock is the most flattering description.
What is math rock?
So it's more like sharp noises, like a little like I was saying, like staccato, like yes, yeah, it's like a genre of indie rock, but it's kind of like, as I was reading this, that's kind of like the rhythm I had in my head, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I had people say like they start reading it and then it sounds weird to them, and then slowly as they read it, they start to like hear it, and it's using a lot of like hard consonants, shorter sentences. There's a way that I like to use clauses, so they have more of like a, I don't know. There's also like a little bit of a formal quality to it. I really nerd out on sentences a lot. So I think the trickiest part is like getting in and like attuning my ear to the way that I want to be writing. So I will say this was a much trickier one. And it was also different because it had a little more research involved in it. I'm not gonna lie and say there was a ton of research. There are people that do really, really intensive research, and I do very, very basic baseline research. But that relative compared to my first book, which had no research and is much more of a comic novel, this is a little bit more sober, sincere, and slightly research oriented. So it took a little bit more time in that sense, but it was definitely a different experience. Yeah, I don't know. Did I miss any part of that question?
No, but I'm like, when you're doing it in like these bursts, if like say you're taking a few months off, like how do you then find like the same sort of rhythm or the same sort of tone or the same sort of how do you find that again? Like,
Yeah.
That's got to be difficult. I mean,
I think it's just rereading what came before, and I think if it's continuous, you don't have to do that much like reading back what you've already done. But there were a lot of times where maybe 6 months had passed, I hadn't worked on it, so I have to read the whole thing again from scratch to kind of get into it and find my bearings and see where it is. And because I tend to write these almost anecdotally and in piecemeal, it does make it easier in that at the end, there's always going to be a little bit of shuffling around of order. And sometimes pieces are kind of standalone. But I always had this idea in my head for, I don't know, last decade or so, which is, if folks don't know, I talk about it, there's an essay in Lit Up where I kind of go into the genesis of this, but this is loosely based on a real life thing. A South Korean film director and actress were kidnapped by the North Korean government in the late 70s by Kim Jong-il. Was Kim Jong-il, right? I always get him and his son confused.
I get the Kim Jong mixed up, which is terrible.
Yeah, but
it was the grandfather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a huge film buff, which a lot of people don't know. He actually wrote a North Korean book called On Cinema, about the art of cinema, and it was all about how like cinema is worthless if it's not propaganda or pushing a political message. And he also had a video collection, like a famous video collection, like 15,000 titles. So he kept Shin Sang-ok and Choi Eun-hee in captivity for close to a decade. They made 7 films, propaganda films, under the North Korean government. The most famous one is Pulgasari, which is a anti-capitalist Godzilla ripoff film that was made in 1985. It's free on YouTube, and it's a pretty cool watch. I'm not gonna say it's like riveting and it's A+ cinema, but it's actually like, it's a strong narrative. It's kind of compelling. It's campy a little bit. It's like, it would make a good midnight screening. I keep actually wanting to go to someone and be like, let's screen this and do a midnight showing of it. So I'm getting off track, but there was like a genesis or seed to this and that story felt so like ripe to be played around with or adapted somehow, and really like hit so many of my interests, which is a fascination with film and cinema, obsession with politics, and just like it's stranger than fiction. And I thought that there was just an opportunity to play with that concept, and knew it was something that I always wanted to kind of do something with.
My second question was inspiration. I'm not even joking. So thank you. That makes my job as an interviewer much easier. My third, so I approach a lot of what I read. I have a really useless English master's degree, but I wrote my master's thesis on detective novels, and I wrote on from like the 1920s to basically the 1980s, and just like the shifting role of the reader, and how the reader is asked to kind of perform different functions or different roles in different eras of detective novels. I kind of came up with my own eras. It was a glorified book report, but it got me a master's degree, which is cool.
So you read a lot of Chandler and
I did, yeah. But I mixed in some Mickey Spillane and some some more campy stuff, and but then I kind of moved into the, for lack of a better term, like the postmodern. So I read Paul Auster and Dennis Johnson and stuff like that. And then I had my pension was my middle phase there, the Grand Law 49. But so what interested me was this when I read the book twice. But I read it two different ways. Like, so like you said, and the way it's broken up in vignettes, you can almost like just say, hey, I'm going to read like 5 of these today, and then you can like stretch it out, and that kind of, instead of binging something immediately, you can kind of stretch it out. And then the second time I read it, I read it in 2-3 hours. So what was your intention then in the way you structured it, and how was your how did you intend for the book to be read? Was there something like was there something that you were kind of conjuring, or something that you were kind of something that you were trying to present to the reader in the way you wrote it, or the way you wanted it to be read? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just having a weird compression brain and really struggling to write at length. Anything that a lot of people expect that maybe this was significantly longer and then cut all the way down. That rarely ever happens for me. It's usually taking like a kernel of a few sentences and actually building it up. Automatically, my mind is like cutting down to think, what is the most streamlined way of putting this or writing this? So that structuring has always felt really natural to me. And then there were folks that I read early on, like, there's Joan Didion's Play It As It Lays, early Robert Coover short stories, a number of like authors who would play around with, I don't know what you want to call it, but snippets, vignettes, these kind of collage style narratives. And they were always really appealing to me in that they seem to be able to bypass what I would say is a lot of transitional filler that may exist in books, and get to kind of the heart or the essence of any single scene. So it felt more concentrated in a way. And I wanted to figure out how to write like that. And it has always felt just natural, where most of my short stories, essays, with rare exceptions, take the form of this type of highly condensed style. And in terms of how people read it, I think a lot of people have been like, oh, I've been reading like 2 sections a day. That's cool. I don't want to pretend that it's like, oh my God, these are like incredible poems that like you have to just like read one and then like take a day off to really just like take it all in. I don't think it's necessarily like that, but I do put a lot of time and effort into the sentences. So I think it's worth reading it in blocks as opposed to one continuous through reading, but I'm not sure I have any strong feelings about the best way to take anything in, or I'm very big about like policing the way that people read or experiencing things.
No, I'm sure you just got to be excited that people are enjoying it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's very weird to me when people, if they've released like an album or like a short story collection, say that you have to read it this way. I've seen it a few times, and so it's very strange.
It's, yeah. one of the things that really struck me was there was kind of almost different like two different types of imprisonment in the book, right? There's when Vasant is like actually in prison, and then there was when he's like his gilded prison, right? When he's able to swim his laps and just spend an inordinate amount of time in the library. And Mo DC is gonna brag about the fact that he read every single book and has them all memorized or whatever. So when you have like these two different types of imprisonment, how did you kind of convey the changes that might have been that Vasant might have undertook, or how did you kind of balance those to show that there was like different types of imprisonment, or that just can you talk about that? Yeah.
I think like loosely the idea of captivity feels like a really major concept, and it's almost like nesting dolls of captivity in the way I think about it, of people who are very almost captive in their social roles that they exist in. And that may be Zara the wife, it may be president, of feeling like he has to embody this certain thing. It may be Vasant as a main character, as a director, and this kind of lore or myth that he's kind of created around the profession. And then there is very real physical captivity of being in a prison, of being held in this house yet treated like you're a guest.
Right.
And then I think that dovetails with the Falcons being part of this, and the cover of having this masked bird who is being held and used at will. So I kept thinking about that as like this recurring concept that manifests in many different ways and can probably be seen from a variety of different angles. But I don't know. It was definitely a recurring piece. And thinking about it now, there are just elements that it kept coming back, even if in the later parts of the book where they end up stuck in a hotel, it still feels like captivity. And one part of that is probably comes up a lot is boredom.
Right.
That within all this wealth, within all this incredible opulence, there's a great deal of boredom. And boredom is a really interesting thing, I think. And it's very hard to write boredom in a compelling way. And I thought, like, is this going to be just a real slog if a lot of it is just somebody trying to kill time in a way, and just feeling bored and not knowing what's next, and kind of living in a state of limbo? And what does that feel like?
I never thought about it in terms of that, but there's like almost like a luxury or a privilege in boredom, right? It's it's your so you talked about your political work. How did that really inform your worldview, and then how did that really manifest itself in this? Like, how did you take what you were experiencing, working with canvassing or organizing or press releases or any of that stuff that's how I dealt with you previously, through my time with the Democratic Chronicle, was, getting press releases, or, getting tips about city council doing this and this and this, and, how many pepper balls were fired during the first few nights of the protests, stuff like that. So
sorry when I would send you a press release like 2 hours before something.
I try to be flexible, because I mean I feel like a lot of what you guys were pitching was worthy of newsworthy rather. It's difficult just because we have such a small staff that's just keeps getting smaller, sadly, and a terrible parent company that just wants to do what it can to destroy print journalism and local journalism. But we're not here to talk about local journalism. We're here to talk about your book. I still have scars, but I'm in therapy right now, and I think that's helping. No joke. But so how did your role? How did your political activism and your work and your canvassing, and how did that manifest itself in this book, and how did that inform what you were trying to do?
Sure. I would almost say a lot of it just feels like osmosis. When you're just like steeped in political work all the time, it becomes a thing that you're talking about with other people, the thing you're thinking about all the time. And when I think about this as a political novel, I thought about what are the pieces of my work that are actually really interesting to me, or what are the maybe like political theory things that I fixate on. And probably it's power at the end of the day. I'm very interested in the idea of power, how one accrues power, how one keeps power, how power is lost. And that's so much of the work that we do is a search for power and or trying to destroy somebody else's power. So I think that a lot of this book is written through the lens of power, and where I may not have answers to it, but characters kind of grappling with that question, as well as investigating like the morality of it, the morality, of having so much concentrated power and whether that is an ethical thing. So I would say that's where the politics really come into it for me.
And it's also terrifying thinking about how this composite world that you constructed is manifesting itself. I keep saying manifest. I'm trying to sound smarter than I am apparently. But how this composite world seems like it has more and more seepage into the American world, into the American worldview, into the American play for power. It's, you know, as it drifts further and further. Well, it's not drifting. It's happening. As it's becoming more totalitarian or fascist or any of those things. So that's what I thought was powerful about this book, is that even if you don't have, even if you don't really care about what's happening overseas, I mean, you should, but even if you don't, it's still here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a good point that I always forget. Like, I started writing this right as Trump was elected. And I thought, oh, if I can write this really quick, then it will feel like super prescient and like the timing will be perfect. It just took way, way, way longer to finish. But
and then people stormed the Capitol.
Yeah, exactly. Then people stormed the Capitol.
Yeah.
Then all sorts of crazy shit started happening, and then I could no longer like figure out what I was writing. But yeah, the election of Trump felt like, oh, you have to take this idea because it feels like extremely relevant to the current moment that we're in. And I think doing research on different dictators, autocrats, you see these through lines and commonalities between all of them. And that was maybe the funnest part, was being able to take little pieces from these different authoritarian figures and piece together this, fictional character. Like, I learned that Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe had he had a house with 25 bathrooms and anti-aircraft missiles around the house. One of my favorites was the Shah of Iran, who for an anniversary of Persian Empire had a $100 million party, and they served peacock meat, which apparently is the height of luxury. I had no idea. And then also like Nicholas Ceausescu in Romania. He fled the country when there were student uprisings. So some of the pieces about student uprisings happening were in relation to that. So there are like these, cyclical things that keep happening in history, and the push and pull of social movements that are happening on the ground, and these efforts to consolidate and concentrate power. And the interplay between the two, and both sides being kind of terrified of one another.
Let's just give people healthcare. It's not asking for a lot of life. I thought one of the other interesting things about the book, is in the novella, whatever, was the balance you struck between almost like a black humor and then like almost like horror on some level.
Yeah.
So how did you work to, like, you're reading some of this stuff and it's terrifying, but at the same point, it's like, it's really funny. So how did you how did you inject humor into something that could be so dark and disconcerting?
Yeah, I would say striking that tone was difficult, and a lot of my past work just feels like straight humor, or there are a lot of one-liners and things like that. And some of this was resisting the impulse to lean too hard into that, where it felt like there were opportunities where I just wanted to go off the rails, and I had to kind of keep it in pocket and know what I was writing, which is something that was slightly more serious. But it felt like the opportunities for humor came through more eccentric characters that I could bring in that provided maybe not comic relief, but they were able to play off the main character who plays it pretty straight and deadpan, and just like offer a kind of contrasting tone. And that was kind of the entry point into humor, because I wanted to be able to, I love ending a section with some kind of deadpan line or something. Like I always have, I don't want to like say that I love my own books or writing, but there,
I'll allow it.
there are sections where I'm like, oh, I really enjoyed like the closing line in that, like it kind of like tickled me.
Hey, you're appreciating your work. I mean, it's good to have confidence in your work. I mean,
I don't know if it's confidence, but I want to write the stuff that I actually want to read.
Yeah, I mean, I've turned in articles before and it's like, this is the worst thing I've ever written, or like a beer newsletter. It's just like, this is one of the most terrible things I've written, and then I'll write like something I published today. I'm like, that's one of the most fun alliterative sentences I've ever written. I'm really enjoying that. It just that came to me. So yeah, I get it. I mean, it's I haven't tried to tackle a novel or anything, but I understand how writing to please yourself is important. You want to make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Totally.
Yeah. Any questions in the audience? I thought I would reach my list, but yeah, go for it.
Well, first I have a comment and then a question. So I really enjoyed the section you read from the novel, and I noticed two things about it. I loved how packed the sentences were. I loved your sentences, and I also noticed that I usually the passive voice just like sets up these red flags for me, but I noticed the intention of that over and over. The passive voices, so somehow you're just there. We don't know who caused this prison. We don't know, it's just reality. It's just no accountability. And I thought that was so effective. So I wanted to say thanks for that. And how many different words you had for absence or diminishment, or diminution, and like starting with the toilet seat where they, you had a million different adjectives for that, and I love that. So anyway, I just really enjoyed it. And secondly, my question is, did you read any prison memoirs in preparation for this? And if so, which?
Did I read any prison memoirs in preparation for this? I don't think I read any memoirs, but I was looking at more fictional works that take place in prisons. I think I always have the thing of if I'm reading too much nonfiction about any piece that I'm working on, I don't want to feel an obligation to it or start to have that too much in my mind that I feel like I am losing some of my creative control or liberties. But like thinking about prison fiction like John Cheever's Falconer, or Rachel Kushner has one, The Mars Room. And then I think like Kafka novels, like The Trial and things like that, and just the kind of bureaucracy of it felt like a way that I wanted to portray the imprisonment experience as harrowing, but also annoying. Like just something that felt like this endless process, or
The irrationality.
the irrationality of it. Yeah, more than probably some. So I would say it's. I'm not going to pretend that it's a harrowing, perfectly accurate representation of imprisonment, which is a horrific thing, but maybe a slightly more broader representational way of how it functions and how somebody in that situation might be feeling. Yeah, I don't know if that's.
I think I was interested to know. I just found it really compelling that I just somehow or another we were really able to be looking out through the eyes of the prisoner because all the description, the minute description that was going on, and then kind of like the objectivity of that, which was really so cold. You know, there was that disconnect that I thought was very effective.
Thanks.
Anything else before I get back to my list of questions?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had more.
No. I mean, I live with the book. I tried to make it worth everyone's while, but one of the things that I thought was also very interesting was the relationship between Vasant and the president's
Sorry.
thank you.
Yeah.
Lady friend there, and how it didn't feel. Can you kind of describe the relationship between they're both obviously imprisoned in different ways, but experiencing a lot of the same things.
Yeah, one thing that I knew is I didn't want it to be a traditional, like it would have been very easy to do a romantic relationship.
Yes.
And I didn't want that to be the takeaway or for it to feel too much like damsel in distress. Mm-hmm. And really it's two people in mutual, like independent, terrible situations who find kind of solace in one another and support in one another as just based on necessity and almost convenience. People who would have no relationship with one another in other circumstances, but have been almost forced together, and both of them are suffering in their own ways. So find something that they're seeking in one another. And so it was like how do you tease this thing, or it's also them trying to figure out what is the nature of their relationship. And I think that's a lot of the sections and dialogue between them is them kind of grappling what they are to one another. So yeah, that was kind of the way I thought about it. I knew where I didn't want it to go, and kind of let it be an exploratory space of these two people are just sort of figuring it out.
Yeah, you didn't want Mulder falling in love with Scully, or something like that. Yeah. So another thing that struck me was the role of faith in the book. There's obviously from the section you read there with Vasant, talking about his own experience with faith or lack thereof, but also faith as a justification for some of the things that happen or some of the actions of a dictator, but then also the perversion of faith so what role did you see faith playing in this, especially when a lot of these totalitarian or fascist or dictatorial states have some sort of grounding in some sort of faith tradition?
Yeah, I don't think I anticipated faith taking such a big part of it, and then found just a lot of sections being somehow bringing that up or bringing it to the forefront. And I think, as you said, it's power often couching itself or hiding behind the idea of faith, and it is a perversion of faith. It becomes something totally different. So some of it is looking behind and seeing the hollowness of that. That a lot of characters may hold these faithful ideas, yet be in strong conflict with them. Distinctions between what is morality, and that morality and religion become two very different things. And Sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're not. So yeah, the characters have a bunch of dialogue, conversation. Around that topic, I would say that, I'm somebody with fairly agnostic beliefs too. So it becomes a kind of terrain where I can also play with my own thoughts around this and own conflicting feelings as somebody who's raised in the Sikh faith, which is a religious minority group in India, yet tend to not be a very religious or God-fearing person, I would say. So yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer here, but I am interested in the way that faith intersects with power and how rare powerful people often rise up without faith or without religion behind them. Just the confluence of those two things seems to happen all the time.
Or as we're seeing here, just the erosion between the barrier that should exist between one and the other.
Yeah. Like, I don't think of Trump as being a particularly religious guy.
No,
but he is able to weaponize it and manipulate it.
Yeah, but as all stable geniuses do. But how are we looking time wise, Dan? Perfect. Let's see.
Got a hardball one?
I don't really, just because I for a drunken purpose, or a drunken purchase rather, I really thought this was one of my better life decisions recently.
It's really incredible that a drunken purchase has led you here.
I didn't expect to get an email from writers and books saying, come hang out and talk about this book. But it's a lot of my life is led in these seemingly weird directions. And, here I am married with a kid and now a city of Rochester resident and working for the government. So all this stuff doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's I'm having fun. Yeah. This isn't about me. This is about you. So what's next? Are you working on anything currently, or short stories, or do you have any other ideas that you were working on concurrently with this, or what are you
what's next?
Yeah,
I will say there's nothing big in the hopper yet.
cool.
I want to try to get an audiobook version of this.
Nice.
So we're working on having an audiobook version. Just working on short stories, essays, little things here and there. Going on vacation, hopefully that is an opportunity to start to dig in more and think about what is the next big thing. There was a big gap between the first book and this book, and I hope it's not quite as long this time. I would love to be able to get working on another novel, and hopefully it will be longer than this. We will see, or maybe not. People like short novels.
It depends on the subject. It depends on how it's written. There's a lot, a long novel doesn't have to feel long.
There's a lot of commercial pressure to be like 250 pages.
Right. It's not like you're writing a detective series where you have to publish something every 9 months.
Yeah.
With the same character who doesn't age or anything like that. But yeah, I thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I did too. This is really exciting to be in conversation.
We were. Ravi was joking with me beforehand. Most of our interactions have been just either in passing at press conferences or different political events, or just strictly online. So this is kind of like the first time we've actually gotten a
this is the longest conversation.
Yeah. And I haven't totally screwed it up, so I'm feeling pretty good about life. This is and it's the Bills season opener, so go Bills! And yeah, this is a good night.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Will.
Yeah. How did I manage to make this about myself? I didn't mean to. But,
no, yeah. I won't.
But
this should be an equal footing conversation.
Yeah, the book was fantastic, and thank you for bringing it to life and sharing it with all of us. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you to Ravi and to Will. Buy the book downstairs or online, and have a great night.
Thanks, Dan.
It was so fun, guys.